We'll be starting in just a moment. If you have read the book that we're going to discuss and you have any questions already, kind of store them away and add to the discussion. We'll be asking Sue questions as we go along. She's going to speak for a little bit at first, and then we'll have time for questions. Okay, I guess I'll kind of gently start now. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Newark Museum of Art at Home, #NMOA at Home. We're pleased to have you at our second virtual book club. I am Stephen Hyland. I'm the manager of public programs at the Newark Museum of Art. Well, we are doing a lot of digital programming right now. This is the reality we're in, and we're kind of making the best of it. We've got great speakers, great programs lined up. If you haven't signed up already, we have a great email that goes out every week listing out our activities. And so at today's session, we will be talking with Dr. Sue Black, OBE, author of Saving Bletchley Park, How Social Media Saved the Home of World War II Codebreakers. Dr. Black is a professor of computer science and technology at Durham University, a digital skills expert, social entrepreneur, consultant, and international keynote speaker. We're very glad to have Sue with us here today. If anyone has questions, I'll repeat again. If you have any questions and you're on Zoom, at the bottom there's a Q&A button that you can press and type in your question. We'll come to those a little later on. If you're watching on Facebook, you can comment below and we will get to those questions as well. So thank you, Sue, for joining us. It's great to have you here. I recently finished the book.
Oh, cool.
Really enjoyed it.
That's good.
And I guess I'll hand it over to you to kind of fill everyone in if people haven't read it or if they're not sure what Bletchley Park is. You know, take it away. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stephen. That's great. Oh, well, hi, everybody. You can see, I don't know if you can see my background. My background is Durham Castle and Cathedral and University in Durham, where I'm now an academic. Right, I'm going to start, hopefully, sharing my screen with you. Sorry, my slides with you. 1 second, get that sorted. Cool. Right, is it just me that can see that or everybody?
I can't see it yet, Sue.
You can't? Okay. Right, so why is that not working? 1 second.
There we go.
Okay. Right, can you see it now?
Yep, perfect.
Hooray! Okay, great. Yeah, well, so thanks so much for inviting me to talk today about Bletchley Park, about my campaign to save Bletchley Park. And it's just an absolute pleasure to be here, and I look forward to answering your questions. I'm just going to talk for about 10 or 15 minutes about the campaign, about how I got involved with Bletchley Park in the first place, and kind of what happened after running the campaign too, a bit. So the first time I went up to Bletchley Park was, I think, 2003, so like 17 years ago now, so it's quite a long time ago. And I think the first time I went there, I didn't really know much about it at all. So I can remember sitting on the train on the way there thinking, so what is Bletchley Park? You know, like what happened there? And I remember thinking that I knew that the code breakers worked at Bletchley Park, and that was during the Second World War. And in my head, I don't know why, but in my head, I kind of had this vision of like 50 sort of middle-aged to old guys wearing tweed jackets, smoking pipes for some reason, doing the Times crossword, and maybe doing a bit of code breaking on the side. So that's all I knew about Bletchley Park, and as you'll probably know, some of that's not true anyway. But so that was kind of what was in my head the first time I went to Bletchley Park. So I went to Bletchley Park for this meeting. I went to the meeting, and it's a big, like 26-acre site. So after the meeting, I went for a walk around the site and ended up chatting to the guys who were rebuilding Turing's bomb machine. So I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But so they're rebuilding one of the machines that was used to industrialize the code breaking process. And so I chatted away to them because that looked very exciting what they were doing. And they told me that all these machines were destroyed at the end of World War II. And there were some people had said, there were sort of rumors that Churchill had told everyone to break them up into, and they're really like massive machines, to break them up into pieces no bigger than a human fist, and to bury those pieces kind of separately. So he really wanted to kind of destroy the evidence of the sort of industrialization of the code breaking process that had been going on at Bletchley Park. So they told me about that, then asked me why I was there, and I was there representing this group of women in tech, BCS Women, that I'd set up. And they said, oh, did you know more than half the people that worked here were women? So I said, no, I had no clue, because I kind of thought it was 50-old blokes in my head. And so I said, well, how many people worked here during the war? And they said more than 10,000. So I was completely blown away, and found out that about 8,000 of the people that worked there were women. So I had an amazing time there. And I kind of came away that time thinking, I've got to do something to raise the profile of the women that worked at Bletchley Park. So here's some photos and some information about Bletchley Park. And two of the women that worked there, Jean Valentine and Ruth Bourne, who I got to know over the years. And so I went away that time thinking, I've got to do something to raise the profile of the women that worked at Bletchley Park. So I managed to raise some funding, and we ran an oral history project of the women, capturing the women's memories of what they did at Bletchley Park, because I just thought that we need to be able to tell their story. There wasn't much around Bletchley Park in terms of telling the women's story. And considering there were 8,000 women there, I really wanted to kind of promote that story. So we interviewed, I think, 15 of the women. And then at the launch of that project, the director of Bletchley Park at the time said that the park was having financial difficulties. So this was in about, I think it was 2008. The park was having financial difficulties. At the time, there was swine flu kind of epidemic, and he was really worried that if the visitor numbers to the site dropped, then they wouldn't have much money coming in and they might have to close the site. And he said that if we close, we'll never be able to open again. And I thought, well, that's terrible. I then was invited up to a reception at Bletchley Park, and for the first time really did a proper tour of the site, found out more about the sort of individual code breaking achievements, what happened where. There's all these kind of code breaking huts, what happened in each hut, very exciting stories. And at the end of this tour, the veteran, the guy that was leading us around, said that the work that was done here was said to have shortened World War II by 2 years. And at that time, 11 million people a year were dying. And so I just thought, so this place saved 22 million lives potentially, and it might have to close. That's terrible. So I went away that time, kind of like 5 years after I'd gone away the time before, thinking, I've got to do something to save Bletchley Park. You know, what can I do? And at that time, I was head of a computer science department at the University of Westminster. So I was on an email list for all the heads and professors of computing in the UK. So I emailed everyone. I sent them the photo, so you can see the photo of the hut here with the blue tarpaulin covering it. I sent that around and said, we've got to save Bletchley Park. We've got to do something about this. I set up a blog. So here's my original blog. I set up a blog, and what did we do first? So we wrote a letter. So with the other sort of about 100 heads and professors, wrote a letter which we sent into the Times newspaper in the UK. I was really keen to try and get us in the media in some way. So I emailed all the journalists that I knew, which actually wasn't very many. And luckily one of them was the technology correspondent on the BBC, saying, you know, I think this is a story, please help us save Bletchley Park. And about a week later, I ended up on BBC News. So this is 24th of July, 2008. I ended up on BBC News saying that we need to save Bletchley Park, trying to raise awareness and to you know, I really thought either government or industry should come in and save Bletchley Park and help them, you know, and look at the hut behind me. It really did look like it was going to fall down. So that was 2008. And we had kind of like, I had a big spike in interest, and so did Bletchley Park straight away. We were sort of running on the news channel all day, so it got lots of publicity. And I think I probably got about 200 emails from people around the world saying they wanted to help on that day. And then, you know, so that was really exciting. And it was kind of like a big spike in interest, but then it all kind of like quietened down over the summer and nothing much was happening. And it sort of went into the autumn. I didn't quite know what else to do, because I was thinking what to try and raise awareness of what was happening. And I managed to get in the newspapers with a letter to the Times. We got on the national radio as well, and got on the BBC News channel. So I couldn't really think what else to do. And it wasn't really till later in that year, towards the end of 2008, when I started using Twitter and social media in earnest. And I realized quite quickly that just by, you know, if you go onto Twitter and you type Bletchley Park into Twitter, you can find everyone else in the world that's interested in Bletchley Park and talking about it. So I basically just started doing that. And every day for probably half an hour a day. So typing in Codebreaker, Bletchley Park, and starting conversations with people around the world, telling them about Bletchley Park and asking for their help. So I did that for a while, and various people got in touch, which was amazing. And kind of like sort of joined the campaign, I guess. And then about a month after I started using Twitter, I saw this tweet from Stephen Fry. So I don't know if you all know Stephen Fry, but in the UK, he's known as a national treasure. And at that time, he was the person in the UK who had the most followers on Twitter. And so he tweeted this selfie of him and his friends stuck in a lift in London. And I just looked at this picture, and Stephen Fry is known for his love of technology and his love of history. And, you know, and he's very famous in the UK. So I just thought he's the ideal person actually to get involved with the Bletchley Park campaign. So I checked on Twitter and he was following me. So that meant that I could send him several direct messages, which I did, asking him to get involved in the campaign. And then amazingly, the next morning, he sent me a direct message saying, "I've tweeted, I hope it helps." So here's his tweet pointing at my blog. And that day, I think, so this, I kind of really learned a lesson from this because I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of campaigning. I'm an academic computer scientist. So, you know, no background in PR or marketing or anything. So I was just kind of following my nose, trying to work out what to do. And so this really taught me the lesson that if you find key influential people that care about the same things that you do, you can make a big impact really quickly. So Stephen Fry's one tweet there, I think on my blog, I was getting about 50 hits a day. And this one tweet from Stephen Fry meant that I got 8,000 hits that day. So a massive, massive difference really quickly. And that day I was the most retweeted person in the world on Twitter. So just, you know, having only just really started using it, that was just incredible. So I wanted to include this photo because we did various things. So we ran a campaign for 3 years to save Bletchley Park, and we did lots of different things. And this is one of my favourite photos of me because it just reminds me of a day when I was at Museums and the Web conference in Denver in 2010, so 10 years ago. And this photo just came up on my Facebook as a reminder that this happened 10 years ago. And so that year, Museums and the Web conference was in Denver in Colorado. And we'd managed to crowdfund money from Bletchley Park for me and one of the members of Bletchley Park to go over and give a talk at Museums and the Web about Bletchley Park, about the campaign, and asking for sort of museum support to help us raise awareness. And I don't know if you where you were at this time, but 10 years ago was when the Icelandic volcano erupted. And so this was me. We got stuck in Denver. Which, you know, that's not a bad thing. But we got stuck in Denver, and again through Twitter, someone at Lisa Crispin on Twitter got in touch with me. She's a software testing expert, saying that she'd seen that we were stuck in Denver and did we want to meet up for breakfast. So we met up for breakfast with Lisa in Denver. It was just at the end of the conference, and she said, you know, what are you doing today? And so we said, well, we'd quite like to get outside of the conference center, outside of the town for the day, outside the city. And she said, you want to come to my friend's ranch with me? And at that time, I lived in inner city London and had done for a very long time. So it was very exciting for me to go up to a ranch in the mountains, kind of near Denver. And this is me learning to llama whisper on Lisa's friend's ranch. up in the mountains, and it's just like one of those memorable moments, one of those things that without Bletchley Park, without Twitter, this would never have happened. And I just thought that was incredible. So as I said, the campaign went for 3 years, from 2008 to 2011. And so I think this was probably about 2010, I think, some of Alan Turing's papers came up for auction at Christie's in London. And I really wanted to do something to help Bletchley Park to buy the papers. And someone else had set up a Just Giving campaign to raise funds for Bletchley Park to be able to buy the Turing papers. But their list price was, I think, £300,000. So, you know, a lot of money to raise in quite a short amount of time. And I was at a talk in London, and one of the panelists was from Google, one of their VPs, Megan Smith. And she gave a talk. And as she was speaking, I just started thinking, Google, they've got loads of money. Why don't I talk to Megan and ask her if she can help Bletchley Park buy the Turing papers, or if Google can help Bletchley Park buy the Turing papers. And at the auction, they didn't meet the reserve price, so they weren't actually sold. But then by introducing Google to Bletchley Park and various other organisations getting involved, including the UK government, the papers were bought with a donation from Google and others, and then bought by Bletchley Park and taken up to Bletchley Park. And I was delighted to be there when they were kind of first put on display at Bletchley Park. And there's a big exhibition now of Turing's papers and all about Alan Turing at Bletchley Park. So as I said, it took 3 years all in all. I was working full time as a head of department, university head of department. But it really was my passion and my hobby for 3 years. And I think at the beginning, I thought the campaign would probably take about 6 months, because I just thought so many people will get on board, Bletchley Park will be saved. So after 3 years, I think I was kind of thinking to myself, well, you know, it's just going to go on forever. I'm always going to be campaigning to save Bletchley Park. But after 3 years, the director, you can see here in the photo, said, no, Sue, Bletchley Park is saved. And when I was in a meeting with Google and the director of Bletchley Park, and I think it took a few days for it to sink into my brain, because I kind of been campaigning for such a long time that I couldn't actually believe that it was all over. But it was saved in 2011. And Bletchley Park got, I think, 4.1 million from the Heritage Lottery Fund in the UK. So they got 4.1 million from there, with, I think, another something 1.5 million match funding. So £6 million, which meant that they would be absolutely fine and could start kind of restoring the site. So it was amazing then to see various people come up to Bletchley Park, to see some of the code breakers. So this is Gerry Roberts, one of the code breakers at Bletchley Park, who'd become a really good friend during the campaign, and he was campaigning also to save Bletchley Park. It was great to see him get the recognition that he deserved for all the work that he did during World War II by meeting the Queen and telling her all about what he'd done there. It was amazing to see the Duchess of Cambridge come up to Bletchley Park, and here I am with Jean Valentine, one of the bomb operators, Turing's bomb operators, who worked there when she was 18 during World War II. And it was great to be there with her and to, you know, see the Duchess of Cambridge come along, because her grandmother and her great aunt, so her grandmother's twin sister, both worked at Bletchley Park. So that was amazing. And here's, you know, you can see the difference in the huts, just as an example, before getting the Heritage Lottery funding and after. They were renovated back to how they would have looked during World War II. And so now I've written a book, Saving Bletchley Park, with my friend Steve Colgan. And so I wrote all the details of what we did on the campaign, and Steve wrote the more kind of historical parts of the book. And I'm delighted to hear that, Stephen, that you've read it, and hopefully some others have too. And again, you know, like a couple of years after the campaign finished, we kind of heard rumours of a film being made in Hollywood, and that turned out to be The Imitation Game. And that was quite funny, because through Twitter, we'd get some kind of gossip now and again about what was happening. So we knew initially there was a film about Turing. That's it. We didn't know what it was going to be. Then we were told, or we heard, that it was going to be, oh God, I've forgotten his name now. A different actor anyway. Oh, I can't remember his name, who was going to be Alan Turing. Then it was Benedict Cumberbatch, and we all got very excited. And then we heard what the name of the film, and, you know, all sorts of things. And it was great that they filmed a small part of the film at Bletchley Park in the ballroom, which was the bar scene in the film. So that was great too. In God, I can't remember what year. I think it was 2017. I think I got an OBE. So I think that's partly due to the Bletchley Park campaign that I ran, but also I've done lots of stuff around women in technology and promoting women in tech. So that was amazing. I kind of feel now that I'm trying to get all the members of the royal family into my slide presentation, but that wasn't my idea. But I see now, like the last few, I've had 3 different people. So I really like this photo because it looks like me and Prince Charles are kind of like fist bumping, like we're down with the kids. But actually we're just shaking hands. But that makes me laugh whenever I see that photo. So that was obviously an amazing honor to get that. And that's kind of it, really. That's my kind of short, very high overview of what we did on the campaign. There's so much more detail. I mean, it's 3 years of hard work by me. Oh, and many, many others. It wasn't just me. Well, I guess I'll leave it there. I'm really looking forward to some of your questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sue. That was great. And what a great story it is.
Thank you.
We have some questions coming in. The first one I'll ask you is, why were so many women working at Bletchley Park?
I think there's various reasons. I mean, I guess the main reason is because most of the men were away fighting. You know, most of the men were soldiers at the time. And what was interesting for me was that there were so many young women, you know, and I hadn't thought about it beforehand, but of course it makes sense that they were recruiting women from school and university. And like Jean Valentine that I talked about, she was recruited. She'd been recommended by her headmaster because she was good at things like cryptic crossword puzzles. It was the first time that she left home. So she lived in Scotland and she came down several hundred miles to Bletchley, arrived at Bletchley station. And she said she didn't even know where to go. She was just told to go to Bletchley railway station. So she got the train down there on her own from Scotland. First time she'd been away from home, and asked at the station when she got to Bletchley, you know, like where she should go. And they said, oh, you know, like everyone just goes over there kind of thing. And it is opposite Bletchley station, Bletchley Park. And then she went into the site at Bletchley Park and had to almost immediately sign the Official Secrets Act. So, you know, she said that she was taken into a room where she was, you know, told in sort of no uncertain terms that this was a very serious thing that she was doing, and that and she said there was a soldier there with a gun, kind of like standing behind her, not in a menacing way, but just to, you know, you can imagine being an 18-year-old girl. It was pretty scary. And, you know, she signed the Official Secrets Act and kind of said that, you know, everyone thought that there's just no way that they would say anything about it to anybody. And, you know, like everyone working there was told not to speak to even the person sitting next to them unless they had to, about what they were doing. I think only 6 people in the world actually knew exactly completely what was going on there. And most of the people there, you know, never talk to lots of the other people that were working on the same site. There's just some incredible stories come out of there. But yeah, so 8,000 young women, really, I think mainly between sort of 18 and 23. So it's just incredible.
Wow. We have kind of a follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
Someone's asking, can you tell if the women knew computer processing? What did they do on a daily basis? And if it took all these people to break the code, how did the Germans create the code? So there's a lot of questions in there. Feel free to kind of answer how you like.
Yeah, well, I mean, so the Germans had the Enigma machines, which they were using to encrypt their messages. And so Enigma was used, you know, you've all seen the Enigma machines. They were used in the trenches by the German army. And so their messages were encrypted and sent to each other. And then there were other machines used by different so, you know, like the Navy and the kind of like the higher command used a different system. But in terms of the Enigma, which was the most widely used, The Enigma machine was used before the Second World War. I think, I can't remember exactly when, but, you know, like 10 or 20 years before. And I think for banking, you know, like to keep financial details encrypted and stuff. And so 3 Polish mathematicians actually kind of broke the Enigma. So they did the code breaking that at least semi broke the Enigma code before the code breakers at Bletchley Park got involved. And I think Alan Turing actually went and met up with them at some point to find out what, you know, what they had done and how they'd managed to do it. And I think Turing's work built upon the work of the 3 Polish mathematicians to break Enigma. So I forgot what the rest of the question was.
It was about the women of Bletchley Park and what they did on a daily basis.
Yeah, so on a daily basis, the women were, so Turing came up with the theoretical model for the bomb machine. And the bomb machine was those big machines that you see with the big sort of cogs on them. And so what those machines do is they run through all the kind of like combinations and permutations of what the Enigma machines are encoding of the code kind of key for that day. So they just would kind of like rattle through. Sometimes they'd find, the machines would find the answer in like half an hour. Sometimes they wouldn't find it in 24 hours. But the key for the code changed every 24 hours at midnight. So the code had to be rebroken every day. And what the women were doing was working with those machines and maintaining them and making sure that, because they'd go through, find a combination, then the women would have to see if that made sense with the message to check that it was the correct combination for the key for that day. So if the message then made sense, then it was the correct one. And if not, then they had to set the machine up again and leave it running again till it got through to the next possible combination of settings. This is not the easiest thing to describe.
Yeah, it's okay.
But they were mainly working in the huts, working on these massive industrialization of code breaking machines, which were very, very noisy. And there's, I don't know if it's true or not, but apparently the machines used to get very hot, and so they used to hang their they used to sometimes wash some of their clothes and hang it on the machines for them to dry because they were warm, maybe in the winter, because there was the huts, you know, it can't have been that much fun to work in the huts because they were wooden huts with no heating or anything, or, you know, or air conditioning. So, you know, apparently in the winter they were absolutely freezing, and they like, you know, covered themselves with blankets as they were working. And in the summer they were absolutely baking hot, and they did sort of like 8 hours on, 16 hours off working. And there's some amazing stories, actually. I just remember one of the other women talking about, so someone asked a question once when I was at an event to some of the women that worked there, saying, you know, did any bombs drop at Bletchley Park or near Bletchley Park? And one of the women said that her and her colleagues were working in one of the huts one year, and they're just sitting there working away, and they heard this really loud explosion, and the hut kind of went up in the air and came back down again. And, you know, and everyone just carried on working, like even through that. And I'm not sure how far away the bomb was, but it was pretty close, you know, and they just kept working. So, you know, like heat or cold, bombs dropping outside, they just carried on working. It was just incredible.
Wow. How many messages were coming in, like, per day? And like, what would that look like? What would the messages containing?
Well, so the messages, in terms of Enigma, the messages were between different parts of the army to other parts of the German army, like messaging each other. So it was all the messages that the German army were sending to other bits of the German army, basically. And so, yeah, I don't know how many that was, but I imagine it's thousands of messages a day.
Wow. Someone would like to know a little more about Alan Turing and kind of his story and how he fits into this.
Yeah, so Alan Turing was one of the, I think, original code breakers at Bletchley Park. So it was called the Government Code and Cipher School when it was set up, Bletchley Park. And I think, I can't remember exactly how many people went there right at the beginning, but just a few. And that turned into sort of 8,000, 10,000 people over the years. But Alan Turing was one of the key code breakers, along with some other key people. And he worked there during the war. And as I said, he came up with a theoretical model of for a machine to industrialize the code breaking process. So before they had the machines to do that industrialization, everything had to be done by hand, like all the time, every time. Whereas once they had a machine that could crank through all the possible permutations, then, you know, practically every day they would manage to hit on the right combination, which would enable them to read the messages every day. So previous to that, you know, it was very rare that they would actually be able to read the messages. And then once he'd come up with that model, and a guy called Doc Keane and his team had built the first machine to kind of go through that process, then they were better able to read more of the messages. And in fact, sometimes, you know, they could read all the messages coming through every day. So his work was fundamental in that respect.
Great. Someone's asking about Stephen Fry's involvement and how influential was he and Twitter itself in the success of the campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I think Twitter was key, really. I think if we didn't have Twitter, we wouldn't have saved Bletchley Park, I don't think, because I think that it really enabled us to get out to so many more people and to kind of raise awareness just in general. But I think, you know, I spoke to some people right at the very beginning of the campaign, so before we were using Twitter, including one that was related to work done in the Heritage Lottery Fund. So Bletchley Park had, not long before the campaign started, had put in an application for funding from Heritage Lottery, which is one of the big funders for that type of thing in the UK. And their funding proposal had been rejected. And when I talked to someone who was involved, kind of not directly involved, but related to the sort of success or otherwise of the applications to Heritage Lottery, he said that no one really thought that Bletchley Park was a going concern, and they didn't want to throw good money after bad. So that was kind of how it was seen at the beginning of the campaign. And so I guess what we did over the 3 years, and particularly with Twitter, was just to create so much public interest around Bletchley Park, to get so many more visitors going to the site, that eventually, you know, it just the way that people, the public and also, you know, funding bodies saw Bletchley Park. So then they did see it as a going concern, I think. And it was really interesting that, you know, over time, more and more people got involved. And I think with, you know, with Twitter, you can find people that already care about things that you're trying to kind of contact them about. Whereas before Twitter, how would I have found people that are interested in Bletchley Park? Whereas through Twitter, I could just check every day, you know, and you can just search Bletchley Park and then start talking to those people. So, you know, you can find the people that are interested in your cause, I guess, really, really quickly, within seconds. And if you kind of do that over and over and over again, you can build up this massive community of people who care about the same thing. And with those kind of numbers, there's kind of strength in numbers, and also getting like high profile people involved, you can make such a massive difference. And I think we just kind of changed public perception. And another thing to mention is that Bletchley Park was kind of a victim of its own success, in terms of, you know, everything was kept quiet during the Second World War. And everyone was sworn to secrecy. So even though 10,000 people worked there, they were all sworn to secrecy. And so they never talked about it. And, you know, like when I was at school, I didn't really learn about Bletchley Park. It wasn't really part of our history because it was all kept so quiet. And so it really was a victim of its own success because it had been kept so quiet. No one realised its fundamental contribution to what happened to, you know, the end of the Second World War, to shortening the war. You know, even the people that lived in Bletchley, I think they called it the people that lived in Bletchley, like in the village, didn't know what was going on at Bletchley Park. So, you know, goodness knows what they thought with 10,000 people going in and out every day. They just didn't know what it was. And I'm sure some called it the loony bin, as in like, you know, like a place for people who are mad. I suppose. And yeah, they really did not know what was going on there at all. And so, you know, after the war, it all went quiet. all the machines were destroyed. And so, you know, the story was kind of taken out of our history, really. And so I guess what we were trying to do with the campaign is put it back in, you know, put it back in there, show how fundamentally important it was. And so it took 3 years to like really get lots of public recognition for what had happened. And I think, you know, once people hear the story and realize how important it was, then they're kind of on board. But because it was kept so quiet, then people just didn't know.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the kind of it being dismantled after World War II.
Yeah.
Could you speak to like what the site was used for after World War II, until it is kind of like the museum it is now?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't actually know for a lot of the time. I mean, I know it's what it was at some points. So it was, so it's 26 acres now. I think at some point half of it was sold off. So I'm not exactly sure when that was, but it's quite some time ago. And it was sold off to property developers so that the museum could have some funding to help it kind of set up and run properly. And yeah, so that took it from like 50 something acres down to 26 acres. And they sold off half the site, which then became a housing estate. But it meant that Bletchley Park had funding to do stuff, to create the kind of museum as it is today, or like, you know, the first kind of version of that. And again, I can't remember exactly when it became a museum. I know that at some point it was used, so BT, British Telecom, that sort of main phone telecoms company in the UK, used it as a training site for some time, because through Twitter, again, I've met many people that went there on training courses over the years in sort of telecommunications and that kind of stuff. And but I mean, it's been a museum for quite a long time, you know, a really long time, in various guises. And yeah, so sorry, I don't know about maybe it's in the book.
Yeah. There's a little bit in the book, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I guess as well, it would be interesting to know what the funding was put towards. We saw the huts and how they improved. Let's say the £4 million, what was that put towards? And what are your personal favorite parts of the museum, whether it's an exhibit or anything like that?
So I think the renovation of the huts is wonderful. You know, well, the first time I went back after they'd been renovated, you know, previous to that, the huts had been there, but I'd never been inside because, you know, they were sort of a bit of a disaster area, you know, practically falling down. So it was dangerous to go in. So to go back and walk into the huts, into Turing's hut, you know, the hut where Turing worked, and other code breakers, and to walk in, and they've sort of been restored really. It's really lovely because you walk in and they're kind of made to look like they were during the time when the code breakers were working there. And they've done it really well. I think they've got, for example, you know, you might walk into one of the offices and it's kind of got coats, you know, everything done in completely with great attention to detail. They've got like coats hanging on the coat pegs and a coffee mug sitting there. And kind of like images, kind of almost like shadows, projected onto the walls, and recordings of voices, you know, or people talking about stuff that they were doing, or maybe, you know, some kind of typewriter. So lots of very sort of evocative sounds in the offices, in the huts too, which is just wonderful. I mean, it's just lovely. You know, I used to love going there before the renovation, in terms of, you know, I would walk up, and I always got kind of a very, I don't know, sort of frisson of excitement walking onto the site, because you walk in and, you know, as the entrance was back then, you kind of walk up past some of the blocks where the bomb machines were. Then there's a big lake, so you've got a lake with a fountain in the middle on the left, and lots of trees, and then you can see the mansion house kind of ahead of you, and you sort of, I don't know, you walk up and you just think, how many thousands of people, you know, like walked up and down here every day. And so I always used to find that really exciting. And it still is, but now there's kind of more around the site that really helps you to understand what it was actually like there, I think. So in terms of like walking into the hut or the huts and you know, seeing the displays, but also I think the sound and just having artifacts from the time, or that look like they are from the time anyway. The sort of attention to detail is really wonderful. It really makes you feel like, you know, you're there at that time, which I think is, you know, I think for a museum like that, which is actually in the historic place where all of that history happened, it's really amazing to be able to go there and kind of feel like you're in it as well. So I absolutely love that.
Great. Someone is asking whether the Queen was aware during the war that this was going on. I know in the book it mentions Churchill visited. I think that would be kind of an interesting story to hear about as well.
Yeah, I don't know if the Queen was. Next time I see her, I'll ask her. So I don't actually know, but I know there were 6 people in the world, and I don't actually know who the 6 people were apart from. It must be the head of Bletchley Park's one person. Churchill's definitely another person, and I don't know about the other 4. But yeah, so I think you know, Churchill went up there and talked about the geese that laid the golden eggs but never cackled, right? So, you know, the amazing work that was done there, but no one talked about it at all, which is, you know, if you think about it, 10,000 people not speaking about something, working there day in, day out, never telling anybody, you know. And there's amazing stories of like couples who, you know, like when the UK government sent a letter to everyone that was still around that worked there, saying that they were allowed to talk about it now, you know, that they could say that they worked at Bletchley Park and talk a bit about what they did. So when those letters went out, there's stories of, you know, like married couples who probably in their 70s or 80s, both getting a letter from the Ministry of Defence on the same day and kind of like picking them up and opening them, and then finding out that they both worked at Bletchley Park, and they had absolutely no idea until then. So, you know, they've been married 50 years, say, and they'd never told each other even that they'd worked at Bletchley Park. So, I mean, it just is, it's utterly incredible, just the way that it was kept secret. Yeah, and if you think of social media now, you know, like everyone knows, I don't know you know, you can find out anything about anybody now, I think, who's on social media, and it is so hard to keep secrets. It just seems very hard to imagine, you know, how it was kept secret all the time that was going on, and then afterwards as well for sort of 40, 50 years. Just incredible.
Yeah. So we've just got a couple minutes left. We have time for one more question. I think that's just coming in right now. How will you, if you're still a part of it, how would you grow the project? How is the museum currently, especially, you know, to think of the current situation we're in, and cultural institutions are kind of under a lot of pressure. I don't know if you're still kind of part of Bletchley Park or know what's happening there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about it. I suppose because the campaign finished in 2011, and then I was a trustee on the board for a while, and then and then left that. And since then, the thing is, I think it's part of my personality. I like solving problems, and once the problem's gone away, I not lose interest, but I just feel like other people know how to do the next bit, but it's not the sort of thing I do. You know, I like going in and sorting things out. So. You know, Bletchley Park in general has gone from strength to strength over that time. I don't actually know how they're doing at the moment, because of course I hadn't thought about it, but yeah, of course there won't be any visitors at the moment, so I hope that they're okay. But I guess the same as other museums and other organizations that depend on visitors for their income. Yeah, I'm not sure, I'm afraid, but we can always tweet Bletchley Park and ask them.
Yeah. So just one more question, our final question. Did they ever receive messages that had evidence or reference to genocide?
Not as far as I know, but I mean, yeah, I don't know that, I'm afraid.
Okay, Great. So that's all of our questions. Thank you again, Sue, for joining us.
Thank
It was
you.
great to
Thanks
have
very
you.
much. It's a shame I can't see everybody. I'd love to see
Right.
everybody here.
So everyone,
if anyone's got more questions, do chat to me on Twitter. I'm at Dr. Black on Twitter. I'll be checking Twitter in a moment to see if there's any questions there. But yeah, do keep in touch.
Great. Thank you again, Sue. And if you're on Goodreads, search for Newark Museum of Art Book Club, where we kind of have our upcoming books on there. You can comment, ask questions, have discussions. And we have other programs coming up. Tomorrow at noon, we will have a live lunch and learn session on the topic of the arts of global Africa with a curator of African art. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.